Hello my dear friends, I'm Max or Terrier 55 Stepney, and today is not the 4th of July, unless you happen to be watching this video on the 4th of July, in which case, good timing, and happy 4th of July. In the last instalment of Guide Rail, we looked at as many examples as possible of British steam locomotives that had inexplicably found themselves in North America. Such a long and extensive list it was, with engines from all backgrounds, that we've had to return for a part 2, where today we'll be looking at some of the more obscure examples of engines that have crossed the Atlantic. Last time we ended with the mighty LSWR A4 Pacifics that were on the other side of the Atlantic. But number 4489 Dominion of Canada is with a smaller British engine for company that is also on static display. Now an engine that I'm very interested in. But maybe not one that you'd think the biggest Canadian railway museum would be interested in. This is Terrier 54 Waddon, which is very strange for me to say. Built in Brighton way back in 1875. Over its life, it worked with the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway, and for the South Eastern and Chatham. Like many other of Stroudley's Terriers, Waddon worked right into British Railways days, retiring in December 1961 at Eastleigh after 86 loyal years of service. It very likely would have been scrapped, but many miles away, the new museum, known as Expo Rail in Montreal, was looking to acquire more steam engines. They had gathered as many withdrawn Canadian locos as they could, but wanted to have some comparison pieces from earlier European railways to have on display as well. A Victorian tank engine like Waddon would be perfect, especially given its age and as it still retained the original style smokebox and cab. British Railways told them about it, before the more appropriate Dominion of Canada became available of course, and it was sold in June 1962. Eastleigh Works overhauled the engine and sent it out to Expo Rail the following year. They even sent a piece of track for it to stand on, an original LB and SCR section that had still been in use at Lancing Carriage Works, as a little reminder from home. Waddon has remained here ever since, now celebrating its 150th birthday, sadly without a reunion with the other 9 Terriers that are still around. As special as Waddon is, in my eyes at least, there is another Victorian era engine from the Southern Railway that has ventured out to Canada. This elegant London and South Western Railway T3 involves the story of another elegant engine, the Great Northern Railway's Stirling Single No. 1. In 2008, the National Railway Museum in York hosted a live stage adaptation of Edith Nesbit's The Railway Children. The highlight being that they used a real steam engine within the purpose-built theatre. Occasionally, this was done with pannier tank number 5575, the engine used in the original 1970s film adaptation. This can be found at the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway. The theatre version was so popular that production also moved to both Waterloo and King's Cross in London. In 2011, the Toronto Railroad Museum in Canada wanted to stage the production for themselves, but they felt that an authentic British steam engine would be needed to match the story. As it was on demand for the UK stage, the NRM couldn't offer the Stirling single, but another engine in their collection would also fit the role. Adams T3 No.563 of 1893 was free, so was sent to Roundhouse Park in Toronto. Whilst there, a diesel would propel the old engine through onto the stage, which had seats on either side. Of course, the T3 wasn't actually in steam. In true theatre style, it was aided by the use of fog machines. When it returned to the UK, it would have the chance to run again for itself after 70 years. The NRM donated the engine to a group at the Swanage Railway in 2017, and in 2023 it returned to working order. It was a surprising candidate to be steamed again after so long, and equally because it is not the only part of the Swanage Railway's collection to have made it to North America. LSWR No. 53 is a Drummond M7 class, built in 1905. It ended its career at Bournemouth in 1964, hauling the last push-pull trains in the country. The other M7, the oldest of the remaining engines, had been preserved at the National Railway Museum 2 years earlier. No. 53 was also saved, but by a private buyer, who had also bought Schools Class No. 926 Repton. That had been withdrawn in 1962, and both engines were donated to the new heritage collection called Steamtown in Vermont. The southern engines were sent out in April 1967. Repton was then loaned to the Cape Breton Railway in Canada, once again having modifications to be able to run between Glace Bay and Louisburg. These included a high-sided tender to carry more coal, headlamp, new couplings, a cowcatcher, and of course a bell. By 1979, that tourist railway ceased operations, and Repton rejoined the M7 on display in America. They sat out in the elements for another 10 years, looking extremely out of place with the other locos on display. In 1987, Steamtown began moving to a new base in Scranton, Pennsylvania, which was to be short-lived. This was the collection of Francis Nelson Blount, who had struggled to find a rail yard both big enough yet accessible to have these many engines on public display. There was significantly less rolling stock, but having said that, a GWR Collett brake coach gave support to the two southern engines. A third, more unusual engine in this collection we'll talk about later on. They were sorting through their vast collection when the Southern Repatriation Group was formed to bring the M7 back to England. number 53 was sent to the Swanage Railway, and restored once more to running order. As of the making of this video, it is soon to steam once again, when it can be paired with the Devon Bell observation car that is also on the line. Why this is significant is because this coach has also done an American rail trip. During Flying Scotsman's infamous tour, discussed in the last part of this guide rail, this observation saloon was at the end of the train, right from the very beginning. When the money ran out in San Francisco, the coaches were left behind, and the Devon Bell car ended up being used as an office suite in a car park for over 30 years. In 2006, whilst renovating the site, the Swanage Railway raised funds to return and restore car number 14, where it has since reunited with Flying Scotsman and 2 other Atlantic crossing locos now at Swanage. Repton, meanwhile, stayed abroad for another 2 years at the Scranton base, apparently being notorious for wheel slipping. The schools class was bought by the North Yorkshire Moors Railway in 1989, where it can still be found running today. Though distinct with its high-sided tender, this was actually a pattern used by the Southern Railway, long before it was sent across the ocean. In the preservation era, perhaps many locomotive owners were scared off by Flying Scotsman's near miss in California. Well, in 1991, the National Railway Museum in York felt brave enough to send some of their engines for, just like in the old days, yet another exhibition. The California State Railroad Museum was celebrating 10 years since opening, and invited their British counterparts to come along. The call was received, and so out went the working replica of Locomotion No. 1, the first engine to run on the Stockton and Darlington Railway. This is now found at Beamish Museum, and is playing a major role in the Rail 200 celebration along the S&D. Also in the California Steam Parade was Great Northern Railway J13 tank number 1247. This was actually the first engine to be privately bought straight from British Railways by Captain W.G. Smith in 1959. He eventually donated it to the NRM, where it is now on display. Perhaps these 2 engines were chosen because they were both operable and easy enough to transport. But they weren't the only UK representatives at the rail fair. This is one of the most unique engines on this list, a Sharp Stewart design known as Dunrobin. This engine wasn't built for any railway company, but for one person. The 3rd Duke of Sutherland gained permission to extend what would later become part of the Highland Railway in Scotland. This line ran from the then terminus at Golspie, along the coast and through his estate to Helmsdale. In 1870 he ran this private railway with a small tank engine that he had commissioned Kitson and Company to build. The 4th Duke of Sutherland did an upgrade, and built the 2nd Dunrobin in 1895, running with its own 2 saloon coaches. This independent little train had rights to use the public railway right into BR days, when in 1949 they eventually put an end to this freedom. One coach went to what is now the National Railway Museum, under the care of a group at the Bowness and Kinneil Railway. The engine and the other coach were bought to go on display at the miniature Romney, Hythe and Dymchurch Railway in Kent. Captain Howie, who had originally built this line, passed away in 1963, and the duo was sold again to Harold Foster. He had them sent out to Canada for a museum that he was planning there, only to immediately fall bankrupt. Dunrobin was sold now to the government of British Columbia, running at the Open Air Museum at Fort Steele. Since it was there, it took part in the 1966 Canadian Railway Centennial celebrations, looking very lost in such a changed location from where it had originally been built. Being such an anomaly of a loco, Dunrobin did very well for itself in these strange new surroundings, and was on display at several events, including the 1986 World Fair in Vancouver and Sacramento Rail Fair in 1991. In May 2011, both engine and coach were bought by Beamish Museum. It is very soon to be back in steam in the UK, having been under restoration at the Severn Valley Railway. A smaller exhibit at Sacramento in 1991 was Gwen, a narrow-gauge Hunslet tank engine that had somehow found its way to the United States. This well tank was built in 1920 to work the John Knowles Clay Company works in Leicestershire with classmate Jack. That is now preserved at the Leeds Industrial Museum, but Gwen had a more unusual fate ahead. Billy Jones, a former engineer from the South Pacific Coast Railroad, had built the Wildcat Railroad as a tourist attraction in Monte Sereno, California. He ran it with scaled American locos from previous miniature railroads, and even advised Walt Disney on his upcoming parks. He found interest in acquiring a genuine working industrial engine. After it had been withdrawn the year before, in 1958, Billy shipped Gwen to the Wildcat Railroad. But once it had arrived, he found that the flanges on the wheels would not handle the scaled down track network. When Billy Jones passed away in 1968, the railroad moved to Vasona Country Park, and Gwen was sold to Quentin Jarvis. It was disused for many years, until in 1983 it was bought and restored by Richard Farmer for his own garden railroad network in Northridge. Gwen was returned to steam in time for the 1991 Sacramento Fair, and has since been kept in running order at the private home. A simple Clayworks engine travelling all that way might seem strange, but Gwen is far from the only narrow gauge engine to have made it abroad. Now, I did word this video as engines from the United Kingdom that have been found in North America, so consider these next two engines from Ireland as a little extra. The first one is a Robert Stevenson and Company loco, whilst the other is a Hunslet design. In 1959, a group of railroad enthusiasts in New York purchased two narrow gauge engines. The first one arrived in April, called Lady Enith. She was number 3 on the 3-foot gauge Cavan and Leitrim Railway, which has since been partially reopened as a heritage line. Lady Ennis first went on display at the Pleasure Island amusement park in Boston, Massachusetts, before in 1962 ending up in New Jersey to eventually return to steam at the Pine Creek Railroad. Along with a coach from its home railway and 2 vehicles from the West Clare Railway, they have remained there ever since, last being run in the 1990s. There have been discussions to repatriate Lady Ennis for the preserved Cavan and Leitrim Railway, but that is a possibility for the future. Another engine and carriage also exists from the original Railway 2, being No. 2 Kathleen, now at the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum near Belfast. The second engine was also purchased from the Cavan and Leitrim, where it had worked from 1949, but was originally from the Tralee and Dingle Light Railway. Here it was nameless, but known simply as No. 5, apparently being a favourite amongst the crews. It's quite poetic really that this line was used by so many Irish emigrants moving to the United States, as when the line closed, this little engine would make the same journey to a new home. The plan had been to display it at Edaville, but in 1961 it went instead to Vermont with the rest of Nelson Blount's Steamtown collection, along with Repton and the M7. Cornelius Kelly's father had worked on the Tralee and Dingle before it had closed, so when they discovered that one of the engines had found its way to Steamtown, he decided to buy it. In 1986, No. 5 was saved, and 2 years later it came all the way home to the little railway in Ireland. It was back in steam by 1993, on a small preserved section between Tralee and Blennerville. This was the case as recently as 2013, with their one engine now in need of major overhaul. This line is run by the Kerry County Council, who have yet to fund the restoration, meaning that the line itself has been left dormant ever since. Having had such a heroic return to its homeland, it would be a shame if No. 5 couldn't return to the rails, the engine having been in storage ever since. Now, this next section was very confusing to research, because initially I thought that only 3 of the little quarry engines from Wales had made their way to America. It turns out that, including Gwen and the 2 Irish engines, at least 16 narrow gauge engines have ridden the waves. Most went to separate destinations, for different reasons, and most have indeed made their way back again. My thanks goes to Insane Edward for their help researching the whereabouts of these unlikely little engines. Charles Matthews, a collector of steam-era equipment in Thornhill, Ontario, was around at the right time to witness the closure of many narrow gauge lines in the 1950s and 60s. Over several years, he acquired several British industrial engines, including a Kerr Stuart Wren from the Avonmouth Smelting Company, and Peckett Liassic from the Rugby Cement Works. Shipped over in 1959 and 1966 respectively, they returned together in 2012 to live at the Statvold Barn Railway. The Kerr Stuart was actually restored from 2013 and sent back to Canada, but in 2016, their regulations for such old boilers meant that it wasn't licensed to run there. So, in its fictional green livery, it was sent in the post a 4th time, now sold completely to Statfold Barn. It is now painted in a livery inspired by the Avonmouth Smelting Company, and has gained the name Roger. Along with this pair, 4 engines from the slate quarries of North Wales were also collected. These were Michael and King of the Scarlets from Dunrobin, both of which are still in the condition that they left the quarry, and both now at Statfold. From Penryn Quarry was Edward Sholto and Gertrude. Edward Sholto was privately owned at homes in Ontario and in Illinois, but in 2006 was bought by Beamish Museum. Here it is steamed again once more. Gertrude wasn't so lucky, as in 1968 it had made its way to the Ontario Science Centre, who in true study style decided to dissect the loco as a cutaway example. Even so, in 2016, Gertrude was the last of the quarry Hunslets to join the others at Statfold Barn. Remarkably, 6 more engines from Penryn made a new life away from Wales. In January 1965, the BBC made a feature on the Tonight programme of the old steam machines being sold from the quarry. American antique dealer C.B. Arnett happened to be in the UK at the time and saw the broadcast. Straight away he went to the quarry himself to inspect what was for sale, and snapped up 6 engines, which he planned to auction off in Tennessee. Marklin had already seen life at the Durham County Water Board before being sold to the quarry, and now it ended up at the Winnepesuka Amusement Park in Georgia. Keggin went to the Sugar Mill Museum at Hacienda La Esperanza over in Puerto Rico. Also nestling out here in the open was Quarry Hunslet Nestor. And being so far away, many thought that these locos would never come back. Having been lying next to a swamp for many decades, in a barn with no roof, both engines have made it back from the island. Marklin and Keggin are now found at the Statfold Barn, whilst Nestor has recently been bought by the Richmond Light Railway to be returned to steam. One collector who had snatched up these engines would have made sense, but there were 2 more buyers who also decided to adopt their own little quarry engine. Neil McNish obtained LSWR on behalf of the York Locomotive Preservation Society in 1966. More specifically, this is the Avonside LSWR, not to be confused with the Quarry Hunslet that also had the same name. It was for many years kept in storage near the South Simcoe Railway in Tottenham, Ontario. Suitably, this heritage line also has a Ruston Hornsby diesel there. In 2006, LSWR was unearthed and sent back to the UK, going on display at Locomotion Shildon. It is currently at the Leighton and Buzzard Railway, pending a potential return to steam. The final 3 engines were bought together by Anton Holman, who owned the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. The plan was to open an early wheels exhibit, but after Winifred had been on display here for only a few years, all 3 were instead stored out of sight, next to the speedway track itself. Staying in the exact condition that they left the quarry, all 3 engines stayed tucked away and gathering dust until 2012. Julian Burley and Graham Morris finally came over to bring the hidden locos back to their roots. Winifred is now happily in steam at the Bala Lake Railway. Ogwyn and Glidder, also originally from the Durham Waterboard Company, are both running again at Beamish. Ogwyn has been restored to better shape, whilst Glidder has returned to steam with as much of the original wear and tear that the engine had gained in the quarries before it went to and from America. How so many tiny industrial tank engines travelled so far is a little wonder, especially as it wasn't even down to just one person. It is a happy end to the story when so many of these examples, which had been gathering dust in storage for so long, have now reunited with their ex-shedmates, and in many cases are pulling trains once again. And that is the story so far. I'm sure you'll agree, this has been a long list of locomotives that have somehow found their way to the new continent, each from very different beginnings, and all going there for very different reasons. Almost all of the examples we've talked about in this video have actually come back to the UK as well, still travelling much further than their designers ever thought they ever would. I'd love to know which one you feel is the most surprising to have been found in the USA and Canada. Which engine on this list has shocked you the most to have had such an adventurous life and gone on holiday further than a lot of us have ever gone? To recap, across both parts of this guide rail, we've discussed 34 different engines, not including locomotives that were sent as exports to work abroad, since that would be way too many to count. As an extra note, I've also not mentioned the many replicas of Stephenson's rocket that also exist, some of which are permanently based in the USA. Equally, this list might not even be complete, and I'd love to know if you know of any other examples of engines built in Britain and sent to America that weren't included in these videos. Let me know in the comments below. I would like to thank my channel patrons for making this long-form video possible. Do consider joining them by following the link in the description below to get exclusive rewards and bonus content as a thank you. Make sure to subscribe, as on the first Friday of each month there will be a new instalment of Guide Rail exploring the world's steam-powered history. A big thank you to the following channel patrons: Alex Goodman, GBH Train, D0280 Falcon, Sean Tempest, Random Thomas Fan, Dark White 73, Andrew Dyack, Reese Lee Walter, Ryan RTS, Ewan Pentland, Steam Power 4472, Jude 72, Firewind 10, Luneacres Photography, Mario Sonic 64, Elias, Soda Fox Art, TJOC 9891, Tamsy, and Insane Edward.